Evan, where are you? What's that background? It's like, is that Streetscape in the back? He's like promoting Streetscape.
You're on mute.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Susan.
Good to see you.
Kevin, you're still on mute.
Yeah, for the last year now, I've been schlepping these down to the farmers market at Leucadia Farmers Market once a week. And I talk about whatever's going on. And I'm well informed in just about everything. So especially the Leucadia end of things. So people come in with the oddest of questions, but the foam core inserts, which some of them I've gotten through Lillian, some I've gotten myself, just printed them out. They're good conversation starters. And actually, they usually aren't all up here, but I was hiding a bunch of junk, and they're really convenient for that. It's like, so the one behind me is hiding my drawing table, which is completely stacked with papers. So I'm outing myself just a bit.
Well, thanks for doing that.
I saw you at the farmer's market, Kevin. I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to stop by and say hi.
Oh yeah, do stop by. It's a very social atmosphere there. And while we're selling T-shirts, that's like kind of the honey. So that draws people in.
Gets people in.
And people stop and stare at the maps now, and it triggers questions, and we answer them. And honestly, the PR firm who's delivering all the information on what's happening up and down the 101 right now is awesome. They're doing a really bang up job. I mean,
well, thank you for that good feedback and for doing that public service, Kevin. That's great to hear. Let's go ahead and start the meeting. It's 4, and I think we have all 10.
Yeah, give me just a couple seconds. Get the recording started. Okay, you can start when ready, Mayor Blakespear.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's great to see everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is the special joint City Council and Planning Commission meeting. It's 4 p.m. on Wednesday, August 25th, 2021. And I'm officially calling this meeting to order. May we please have a roll call?
Yes, Mayor, I'll start with the City Council. Councilmember Hinsey.
Here.
Councilmember Lyons.
Here.
Councilmember Mosca.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Crayons.
Here.
Mayor Blakespear.
Here.
Record will show that all members of the City Council are present. I'll move to the Planning Commission. Commissioner Dalton.
Here.
Commissioner Ryan.
Here.
Commissioner Sherrod.
Here.
Vice Chair Doyle.
Here.
And Chair Ehlers.
Here.
Record will show all members of the Planning Commission are present.
Okay, thank you. So our first agenda item is City Council and Planning Commission discussion regarding the development of objective design and development standards for multifamily projects and mixed-use residential projects. We have our planning manager Gates here to do the staff report. So let's go ahead and hear a staff report, and then we'll take public comment.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council, Chair, and Planning Commission. Thank you so much for joining us today for this special session. So today's session is on discussion regarding our development of objective design and development standards, specifically related to multi-family development projects, as well as the mixed-use residential projects. That's going to be the focus today. So I have Jamie Williams from RRM Design Group, who will be joining us for this presentation. And she is on now. I see her there. And Scott Martin as well from the design group. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So let's see, hold on. Sorry about that. There we go. So again, this is our joint session today. And the agenda for today is to provide you an introduction and project overview, as well as an update on the community survey that was referenced in the staff report, And then that's going to be Jamie. It's going to provide that information to you. And then I will follow that up with next steps. And then as you commented, Mayor, we'll have public comment and questions. And then we'll also have discussion. So in the staff report, we had provided a list of questions to kind of help guide the discussion today around the objective design standards. And so we will do that as well. So with that, I am going to go ahead and let Jamie start.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everybody. I first want to start by just explaining a little bit about why this project is happening. Recently, the state has created a number of laws that require cities and local jurisdictions to streamline the review of multiple family and mixed-use residential projects. Next slide. Drive control. What that means is cities are now obligated to create objective design standards which involve no personal or subjective judgment by a city official. This relates to qualifying housing projects with multiple units, often seeking the streamlined processing. And tonight we're going to focus on that type of project. So the goals of the project are around the theme of clarity. We want to ensure that future housing reflects the uniqueness of Encinitas. We want to translate existing subjective language, that's guides existing city policy that allows for personal interpretation or lacks some specifics, and replacing that with clear, measurable, objective development standards. This project also includes streamlining the permitting process by creating a clearer path where applicants, city staff, and community members all understand how a project is approved and what steps are taken. And then to implement Program 3B in the city's 6th cycle housing element.
Thanks, Jamie. So we want to set a little bit of ground rules for tonight, especially just to make sure we all understand the sort of feedback we're looking to hear. Our focus and where these standards that are being created will focus is on new multi-family housing, more than 2 units, it's got to be multi-family, as well as mixed-use projects where at least 2/3 of the overall total floor area is devoted to residential. So there can still be a commercial component, but it has to be dominantly a residential project. That's where these standards are going to apply. Where we're not going to apply is existing single-family lots, single-family homes that are standalone, one project, or even ADUs that are being added or addition to existing single-family residences or multifamily residences. This also will not apply to commercial or industrial projects, anything that doesn't have that 2/3 threshold of residential units. The biggest fear always is, oh, will these objective standards cover everything? And they won't, because you have great regulation already. There is existing zoning. This is not going to interfere with that. Building heights, setback, density, number of stories, much of that is already covered in your municipal code and will remain there and remain the tool for setting the building envelope, if you will. The focus of objective design standards is to regulate the site layout, how the buildings are oriented, the relationship to the street, to the public realm, what architectural elements are appropriate, the size, the proportion of buildings, things like that. And as well as pedestrian circulation, landscape elements, site amenities are all regulated through these objective standards. Subjective guidelines, and what we're really trying to do and what the state is looking for is for everybody to have a little more clarity in the process. In order to allow housing to happen during the Housing Crisis Act, what we're trying to do is give clarity to what that process should look like. So things that are lacking specificity are open to personal interpretation or create incompatibilities or undesirable, those are all subjective by nature. I like the color blue, you may not. Objective standards are going into the black and white realm. There is no personal judgment. Often they are measurable. They want to be clearly agreeable by all. You're taking out the potential for like and dislike and adding black or white. An example within your city design guidelines is of subjective nature. Is buffers are desirable between land uses of the aid creating public-private space definition. You'll notice often the word should, and that's one of the big things objectivity is trying to remove, is the word should consist primarily of physical space enhancements by landscaping or physical barriers such as. That is very subjective by nature and gives a lot of potential wiggle room. On the other hand, something that is objective would say that new residential projects shall provide landscaping and measurable goals as well. So 6 feet tall, those sorts of things are the type of standards that we're looking to add. Again, this is going into clarity for the project as it comes through.
So available today, there is a community survey similar to the feedback that we're hoping to receive this evening from all of you. We've put together a number of questions, and the survey is available on the city website. It'll be available and open until September 8th. And it has a series of questions that focus on information that will ultimately help inform the content of the objective design standards. So to date, we've received some feedback, and we wanted to share some of the highlights of what we've heard so far of what's important to the community. The first thing is that the buildings are very context sensitive, that they visually blend in with the existing context and they're compatible with the surroundings. Architectural features that have popped up as important include building form, articulation, orientation, and the way parking is designed. Not to be confused with parking standards, because we're not doing that. That's a zoning code thing. These are all important design elements, as well as creating usable open space areas. We also heard that utility and mechanical equipment should be screened with landscaping and constructed with screening elements, that prioritization of key design considerations include amenities and signage and screening of utilities, fences and walls, articulation and lighting. All the aspects that make a complete project are important to provide good design direction for. I think that the last bit of information we've received so far is that individual unit entries should not be restricted in placement, that roof lines and roof features should be varied and important to the building design, and that high quality design and materials focusing on building surfaces visible from driveways, parking lots, alleys and streets, and other public areas are important, as well as those visible from shared and individual unit entries. So these are the types of elements that are going to be important to provide that feedback. Again, we're not writing standards for anything associated with the building envelope, but what happens within that envelope and what it looks like.
So what the next steps are is after tonight's meeting, we're going to also take the input that we get tonight from City Council and Planning Commission, and also with the survey, and start taking those subjective standards that we've identified and making sure that we've turned them into objective standards and understand better what the community interests are in relation to those subjective standards, so that we can set those parameters, the shalls, as well as the measurable aspects, or true false aspects of them. We will take those design standards by the end of September is the goal, and then come to Planning Commission in October for the first meeting to actually discuss those specific standards that are being created for the multiple family and mixed use residential specifically, but also we will have additional recommendations to share in regards to single family development as a whole, because as stated earlier, it does apply to residential development with multiple units. So we will have some additional recommendations around those. So we'll continue our public education and continue to gather feedback as well throughout this process. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing for right this second, and we will go to any questions as well as if you want to start the public comment, because there were a few people that did register.
Okay, so let's just ask clarifying questions first, and then we'll go to public comment, and then we'll answer all those questions that were in the staff report to the extent people have thoughts on them. So Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you, Mayor. Just two clarifying questions. Are we only modifying existing guidelines and standards, or are we modifying existing guidelines and standards plus considering any new guidelines and standards?
We will look at the guidelines that we've already pulled that we've determined to be subjective. And so we want to focus on those because those have also been applied throughout time. And then as needed, based on the feedback that we see from you all today, there may be some missing standards as well as from the community during this community survey. If there's things that are missing that we don't even have subjective standards around that would help define these projects, again, within that envelope, then we'll do so.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. And my second question is, have we thought, or have we defined yet, as far as applicability, how this might affect projects that are already in the permitting process, or at what point, based on your schedule of how you anticipate this rolling out? Would it be only new projects that aren't already in the queue?
It would be only new projects and would have require a local coastal program amendment. So it would need Coastal Commission approval.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Kranz.
Yes, so it is my assumption that this endeavor that we're undertaking will still be subject to density bonus waivers and such, and therefore some of what we're talking about here will not necessarily guide the final design of a project. Is that safe to assume?
My understanding with the density bonus, as far as the incentives and concessions, that this would apply to that. They're adopted design standards. And then any physical limitations would be analyzed as well if this somehow limited physical aspects. But mostly I would think those have been applied to actual zoning standards. So again, this is focused more on the objective design aspects.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Doyle.
Thank you. I have a question for Scott. And this has to do with the initial definitions. The mixed-use properties are listed with 2/3 residential. If they have 2/3 residential, they qualify under this. Where was that number? Why was that number picked?
You know what, Commissioner Doyle, that's straight from state law. So it is not something the city or we pulled out of a hat. That is guidance handed down from the Senate bill.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Chair Ehlers.
A couple of questions, maybe for Scott, maybe for Jennifer. First one, are duplexes included if they're not on multifamily zones?
2 units or more.
2 units or more, so they would include that. Okay, great. And I appreciate, I think I'm going to follow on Joy's question. It sounds like what we're doing is taking our design review guidelines And for multifamily and mixed use above this threshold, we're going to convert them into municipal code will it move? Am I correct in that assumption that we're essentially going to replace them with objective ordinances in chapters 30 and 24? Where will this go?
Roy and I are still working out exactly what that final product look like. If it's going to be in the code specifically or referenced in the code, but there will be portions in the code for sure, because there are subjective standards in there that need to be modified to reflect any future changes. So it may be a combination of what you currently see today with a separate design guide manual, except there'll be design standards, and then the code as well. So it may be a combination of the two. There are also subjective standards within our specific plans. So we also have pulled those, and we'll need to modify those as well.
And so so there'll be separate sections wherever they reside, specific plan, a new subsection of the design review guidelines that are design standards that will only apply to these particular multifamily or mixed use that hit the threshold, correct?
That's what we're working towards, is either a reference document so they all reference, so that we're not in the future modifying something 50 times, but rather just that one.
Oh, okay. And then as far as the current design guidelines that will still apply to all the other remaining projects.
The commercial.
Right, residential. Are we considering any changes to make them more objective and less subjective? Like if we have a really good idea here, would we go back as part of this project and possibly apply that?
We are going to take the information that we're getting from the community and from you all today and would apply it to those single family developments that are more than 2 units. So we are going to be looking at those subjective standards. And then Roy and I will talk more about the commercial product and if there's anything around that to apply it as well.
And then the last question is, I know that SB 330 has a sunset January 1st of 2025 on all of it, part of it? And if so, what are the ramifications to what we're doing here if the legislature chooses not to extend these changes in SB 330? I guess we wait and see what happens, can you explain the sunset and whether that takes teeth out of this change at that point?
I think it would depend on how we write it, but I think at this point, I don't know what they're going to do in 2024 because it expires in January 1st, 2025. But they kind of are leaning towards, in the past, extending these sunsets. But we could look at it, if you would like, of what those specific sections are, and that may change in 2025 if that is something that we want to look at to pull back some of the objectivity.
And I'll bring that up again during deliberation, but I think my basic question is, does all of SB 330 expire in January 1st, 2025? Or does just this objective requirement expire? Does the entirety of the objective requirement expire January 1st, 2025? That's my question.
I believe Housing Accountability Act as a whole expires on January 1st, but I will double check with the attorneys during questions.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Krantz.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'd like to re-ask my question because I want to be sure I'm clear on this. It says, one of your slides says objective standard example. And the example is new residential projects adjacent to existing residential uses shall provide landscaping and or a wall or fence at least 6 feet tall to provide a buffer or screening between properties. And it is my recollection that we have a project in the pipeline now that has used as a waiver the requirement to put in a 6-foot wall. And so what you're saying is that we're going to develop a bunch of objective standards, but a waiver can be requested to allow for the developer to not follow our objective standards. Is that correct?
I believe so. They can apply it to any standard policy that we have that physically limits their development.
So therefore, rejecting a project based upon design review using objective standards is going to be subject to an analysis of the waiver that's been requested.
Correct.
Or incentives too.
And the incentives would be the cost of that, affecting their ability to provide that affordable unit.
Got it.
Okay, thank you. So now we will go to the public comment, and I'll ask Kathy Hollywood, the city clerk, to manage that.
Okay, Mayor, we do have 2 speakers, and 2 speakers are in the queue. The first is Gerald Kessler. And just reminding our speakers that your comments should be limited to the item on the agenda, which is the development standards. You can start when ready, and you do have 3 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to speak today about the environmental nightmare housing Staver project on Melba Road in Encinitas that is slated for 31 homes on 6.6 acres, and to take down the grove of mature Torrey pines, 210 other trees, and demo a historical home built in 1938, all based on the density bonus law AB 2345. I recently learned that the city plans to remove all but one of the mature tree lines on Melba to widen the road less than a foot. They have not even been open to the options of traffic calming based on the neighbors' ideas. One neighbor had volunteered to donate part of their property on the south side of Melba in order to spare the trees. I have seen other major cities spare the trees when developing infrastructure. We beg the city to preserve Encinitas redwoods, our neighborhood tree canopy, which aligns with Encinitas' current approved climate action plan. I also heard that Brian Staver continues to manipulate the residents by changing plans from 1-story homes to 2 houses that would look into their homes in order to get trees removed from the neighboring homes. Why have you let the environmental nightmare go this far? I also wanted to mention, I listened last week to the planning meeting. The way Scripps presented their projects should be viewed as a model. They had multiple meetings with the public about the impact of the construction in their neighborhoods. They took the longtime residents' opinions and worked with them. They did not push back on any suggestions made by the planning committee. In fact, they liked your suggestions and valued your ideas. Although I'm fairly new at this process that goes on to build in Encinitas, these planning meetings have become a nightmare to watch. These out-of-towners developers slamming their ideas to the community, and they don't even reside here. How can they decide what gets built here? The last 10 housing projects designed are not cohesive with the community character. Only a handful done are tasteful. The Staver project has no positive impacts on the environment. His style is totally opposite the way Scripps went through the process. Insensitive to the surrounding community, bullying the neighbors to get drains to run through their property. Please help the community save the trees on Melba, the Encinitas redwoods. Preserve and restore the area with the historical home. Please help us find the funding for purchasing the property from Staver Trust. Brian does not understand the community because he was not raised here most of his life. Since he's an out-of-towner developer. Don't pass the opportunity on a potential open space annex for the botanical gardens in Oakcrest Park and a STEM classroom for area school. The beautiful historical home can become a visitor center or groundskeeper. We have had at least 5 major housing developments in the last few years, all in less than a mile from each other, and no consideration of any open space for the community. Please assist a community in preservation and fundraising to purchase the property, and let us enjoy what open space is left in our neighborhood. Thank you for listening.
Our next speaker is John Bilsal. John, you can start when ready.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me right now? All right.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for allowing us to give input about this very timely and important matter. So I would like to speak today in favor of introducing objective design standards to regulate the bulk and the floor area of new development. So driven by real estate market, developers are building larger and larger single-family homes. We all know what mansionization, I hope I could pronounce that, mansionization looks like. Take, for example, Carmel Valley, where there are very large homes in relatively small lots. Or actually, this can take the form of extremely large houses, enormous houses in the gated communities in places like San Elijo Hills. So these are all like the larger context of Southern California in which, unfortunately, we need to operate. The second challenge that we face in Encinitas comes with the newly upzoned R30 sites, meaning multifamily housing. So please forgive me for calling them, for lack of better term, high-density resort enclaves. So these are massive developments of sometimes more than 250 units. Since many are in areas with insufficient public transportation, they require massive parking structures. And in order to charge more rent, and you can't blame the developers for doing it if they're allowed, so they build extravagant amenities, luxury party decks, large pools, spas, and fitness centers, and sometimes a leasing office larger than many office buildings. So these resort-like developments are mostly cut from surrounding neighborhood. They make housing more exclusive and expensive for everyone. In one case that we looked at recently quite closely, the developer inflated the total floor area to such degree that the size of affordable housing dropped to less than 10% of the total floor area. Most importantly, these bulky developments create a monoculture of expensive housing that contradicts the goal of creating a more affordable, inclusive, and diverse Encinitas. So in both single and multi-family housing, the problem is the unsustainable bulk of the buildings. Regulating height, setbacks, minimum lot size, and per acre density, all these things that you already have in the code, they are no longer sufficient by themselves to prevent monster buildings from taking over. In order to achieve socially responsible and sustainable development, please consider regulating maximum floor area of individual buildings, maximum floor area ratio. Or
Mr. Bilsal, I'm sorry, that is your 3 minutes.
2 more words, maximum lot coverage, and how much soil a developer is allowed to import or export from the construction site. So in response to Jamie and Scott's presentation and questions, these are all possible objective measures. Thank you.
Mayor, that does conclude speakers.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we'll go, I'll call on anybody who wants to speak to the questions that they asked. Jennifer, or staff asked in the staff report. Jennifer, would you like to read those questions again so that people can offer any comments on them in light of the public comments and then the information that you're looking to receive as feedback? And also, I actually just had one clarifying question I wanted to ask. One of the things that was mentioned was individual entry should not be restricted in placement. And I was curious about what is driving that. What is the concern with that? Have we had that as a problem?
Sorry, I was making sure I wasn't muted. And not necessarily that it was a problem. It was a discussion point that we were trying to figure out how best to address. And so that's why we were presenting it to the community as one of the questions in the survey. There was I believe there's a subjective standard around that. And so we're trying to make it objective. How much do we want to include that still, and what that specificity that would need to be included in that objective standard?
Okay, thank you. So go ahead and read the 4 questions or put them up, please, and then I'll call on Councilmember Mosca and then Commissioner Sherrod.
Sure, I can share these, and then if you would like, so that everybody can see each other, we can stop share. Just let me know at any time. So just as the background and what's in the staff report is these are just some of the high level design and development characteristics that staff has identified that we've heard as areas of concern, and that's around site planning. So the placement of the buildings, the streets, where the parking is, especially in relation to the surrounding development, the building form and articulation. So what is that scale and massing? And then how do we use design features, materials, and colors, all of the above, or focus more on the features to help break up that scale and massing? And then also landscaping. So the incorporation in the actual site planning, as well as the actual plant materials. And so the questions that we put in the staff report to focus the discussion on today are, as related to these areas of concern, are there specific aspects that you would like staff and the consultants to address through objective design standards? And are there any specific recommendations on how to address these concerns? And then also around that is, are there local existing, so currently constructed existing apartments, townhomes, condominiums, or mixed-use buildings that contain any of these design elements that you're looking to utilize and reflect as good examples for design characteristics around these areas of concern? And then lastly, are there any of these issues that we didn't express in that slide right before this that you want to make sure that we are paying attention to? And then again, around that, are there specific buildings that are good representations of, what you would like to see, or making sure that we are, again, addressing a concern that you've seen in existing development? And so we want to focus on the existing development. And, as we know that there's projects in place, but we can't discuss projects that are still under consideration. So that is the focus. And then let me know if you want me to stop sharing at any point.
Okay, I think that's a good amount of sharing on that list right there. It's also in the staff report. So Councilmember Mosca.
Yeah, I would rather see all the smiling faces than see the slide deck. But Jennifer, your slide deck is very nice. You've done a great job, so thank you. Can we, so the survey that we put together, refresh my memory, how did we put that together? Is that through, did the City Council, Planning Commission have some input into that? How did we put that together?
The survey itself was the consultant and staff working together to look at what we're trying to achieve through our design standards, what we've already have identified as subjective, and trying to get more input, and then just to provide examples is kind of showing those pictures of these are some of the developments that are in town. It's a variety. So it was a.
Will we revise that? Will we revise that survey perhaps toward the end of the process to see, once we've gotten some standards together and language together, to see what the community thinks after we've kind of put it together? Will we reach back out with some sort of survey?
Once the standards are written?
Yeah, once we start to kind of go through, we start to come together with our thoughts about what is important, will we basically test those by going back out to the community and saying, this is what we've put together. What do you think?
Oh, definitely we'll put out the draft objective design standards back out to the community for any comments and input on those standards through the process.
All right. And then what about talk to me a little bit more about outreach? I know that we're obviously sitting here today talking about this, but what other ways are we reaching out to the communities to capture their feedback and their thoughts on these guidelines?
So we have had only 42 responses, which I felt was kind of light considering some of our other surveys that we've put out recently. So I'm going to resend out something this week and asking for our partner organizations and other, outlets to help share, because I found that to be the most useful to get the most feedback. But right now it's being sent out through everybody that has interest in the housing element, through our constant contact, and then also through our city manager newsletter so far.
All right. I mean, I do think I'm like kind of looking at Kevin with his boards back there and his idea of going to farmers market. I mean, we should think outside the box of how we can meet people where they're at and collect their feedback where they're at. If they're not, coming to our website or things that we're kind of putting out there, how can we go to where they're at to collect their feedback? Because it's really important.
We can do that. We did the mobility element a couple of weeks ago, and we're sitting next to Kevin.
All right, good.
We are right next to each other, helping each other.
Not that you have to sit next to Kevin, but no, joking, Kev. To get back to, I think it was Kevin's question in terms of the commercial properties, and just kind of interested in this from the perspective of really want to get in future housing elements and future RENA cycles and requirements and responsibilities. I want to get back to the planning where we're putting the density on the high traffic corridors, the commercial corridors, where we have mass transit, not in our rural areas and our heavily residential areas. And so, I see this kind of 2/3. It's got to be 2/3. To have the objective standards apply. Talk to me a little bit about how do you calculate 2/3? Is that, for instance, if you had a site on ECR, if you had a site on Encinitas, is it based on floor area ratio? Is it based on, if you have a big box like Target or something like that, compared to some housing units, how do you calculate what 2/3 is?
It would be their total floor area of the project versus what's residential component versus commercial component.
All right. Am I not right that the state would want, are we all looking at the fact that these big box stores are going belly up and that these are potentially good complementary uses to have residential? Why is it 2/3 for commercial?
It's 2/3 residential.
Yeah. Why is it 2/3 in that mixed use product? All right. I just, if we want to streamline, I would want to streamline on the high traffic corridors and where there's mass transit. And so those just seem like a good area. Anyways, I'll just throw that out there. Roy, did you want to say anything?
I just wanted to clarify all it says is that these standards would apply to a mixed use development that at least contains 2/3 residential. It doesn't mean that we're permitting mixed use in any zone. So it's wherever mixed uses are permitted that these objective standards would apply to those mixed use development, as long as they provide at 2/3 residential, include 2/3 of the gross floor area is residential.
All right, got it. I guess I was just thinking, like, when we're thinking about streamlining, we would want to, why wouldn't this apply in some of the commercial, applications where potentially in the future, these are areas that we could see, our responsibility go instead of kind of going into the rural areas. But the streamlining, may not apply there if it's not 2/3. A lot of this is already built out.
And you mentioned El Camino Real. So as you know, we've initiated the El Camino Real core specific plan. So within that specific plan, we'll have its own standards, zoning, locations for potential mixed use development that would include housing. And within that specific plan, we'll have their own objective standards. So this is the starting point, and we'll leverage this effort we'll enhance this and incorporate these as part of that specific plan.
All right. Thank you for saying that as well. All right. I just have a little bit of feedback. And I think that a lot of what I've kind of jotted down has already been talked about. You know, it's got to fit into the landscape and the environment that now exists, especially, you know, considering the uniqueness and the character of each of the traditional communities in Encinitas. It flows with the land, and it's not kind of being destructive of the land, but that it's kind of you know, contoured to the formations of the land itself. That there are appropriate transitions, that there's open space and there's opportunities for gathering. I think that's really important in New Encinitas. That developments that are going into some of these areas, there's really not as many gathering spaces in New Encinitas, and so having some of these developments allow those type of opportunities would be amazing. It's sensitive to the environment. Obviously, we are embarking on everything we can do to reduce greenhouse gases and do our part to combat climate change. And you know, anything that is anything that we can do to make these structures as sustainable as possible would be good. Anything that we're doing to encourage community elements and walkability and bikeability. High quality design, obviously that doesn't need to be said, but you know, it was said before. I just want to note that it should be high quality. Anything that we can do within these standards that decreases the massing and the bulking of a project, especially from the street viewpoint. And also, I'm sure Joy is going to talk about this in terms of the native plants and the drought tolerant plants and plants that landscape that gives benefit. I'm not against palm trees, but I think things that really deliver benefits are appropriate, are most appropriate. There's a building that recently went up that I always kind of point to as one that I think that would have been good for affordable housing instead of some other sites on Encinitas Boulevard. And I recently saw it today, and it not only is well, it's the poster child for a lack of design, I think, if you go by it. But it also has big air conditioning units sticking out on the main boulevard. And so it's offensive. It's you know, just not appropriate for that area. And so anything we can do to screen these things or put them, why would it be on street level? It should be somewhere other than, it doesn't have to be on the roof, but somewhere where it's not just in plain sight and detracts from the actual visual aesthetics of the building, although this is not very aesthetic at all. But something that someplace where it doesn't detract. So utilities, the point about utilities is a big one for me. I see it all the time with their above ground facilities, below ground facilities, just air conditioning units popping out as we're basically looking for, you know, more spaces to be outdoors and ride our bikes and walk. It's not pleasant at all. So anyways, I think those are things that's kind of a start for me. And those are things that I wish that we could really incorporate into these objective standards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Mosca. Commissioner Sherrod.
Thank you. I have a quick question, which is, will we be developing those objective standards differently for each specific plan, or are we just going to have them be for, you know, all of the city? And then I have some comments to follow up.
That's part of what the community survey is trying to ascertain as well, is, you know, is there commonalities that are, you know, that can be the same? And then are there specific things about certain communities that are more reflective of that community? So that's
okay. So then I will make my comments in general, applicable to the whole city. I won't try to drill down to each specific plan at the moment. In general, I'm really thrilled that we're going to have some measurable, quantifiable, objective type standards. That's wonderful, and it will make streamlining and approval for these types of projects much simpler and much more defensible, I believe, for whether you approve or deny one. I would like to see parking and storage added, and I would like it to be quantified by the square footage of buildings. I would like to see the requirement for preservation of sunlight for solar collectors. I would like to see preservation of views and to quantify those things. What I would say is that the sunlight should be for buildings that are neighboring that already have installed collectors. And I would say for the views, they should have photo documentation would be the objective standard. For the other things that I would talk about, I would say that we generally want to have higher percentages of open space than we do right now. This is our chance to up it, and I would do it as much as you think you possibly can. I would like to see mature tree preservation. I would like to see that as a blanket and not, we don't have to quantify a mature tree, let's say is 25 years or older, or a certain diameter trunk for a species. You can have your arborist decide what is a mature tree, but an objective standard has to be applied, because otherwise somebody's going to say, it's not a mature tree, right? Okay, and then we need to have, I think when we ID examples that we already have, that is a really great thing, but is it really quantifiable, really objective? I'm not sure. I think things like saying different colors, materials, a differentiation between the base story and upper levels, those are more easy to identify and quantify and say, yes, it has different colors, at least two. You know, that's a quantifiable thing. Okay, at least two colors. Or that the base is the level from ground to until we have upper stories. And I think we should try to expand on some things such as fire safety, not development in areas with extreme threats or elevated hazards. Should be something that we ask our fire department and fire chief to help us identify quantifiable things. What is an unreasonable amount of risk, you know, in those areas where we should not be developing multi-unit? Because it isn't just about the traffic, it's about fire risk. So I don't have that expertise about fire, but other people do, and we have them on tap, right? And we can also prioritize infill growth rather than, you know, utilizing vacant retail or mixed use development at areas like that. I think that the other things, open space should be conserved in general. And I think we should have perhaps an open space overlay where we're not going to develop in this open space at a higher density level. I think this is our chance now. And I think in the survey, by the way, I guess you can't modify it now, but it would have been nice to ask for examples that we already have from the public to get that input from them. If it can be added to it, that would be wonderful. So those are my first thoughts, and anything we can do also to balance our growth instead of have unchecked growth would be very helpful some way. The California natives, I would say 50% for quantifiable, 50%. That's everything that I have on the top of my head.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Sherrod. I'm going to call on you in the order I think you signed up, which is the order I see you on my screen, but I apologize if that's wrong. Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you. So I want to kind of just start by mentioning the examples that in the staff report, starting on page 14, where I think the intent there is to show some examples of what quantitative, objective design guidelines would look like. And that's helpful to me because it lists, specifics about what ours might look like. I think if we look at this, the examples you give, I think you have three, and think about it in terms of what's unique about Encinitas, what's unique about our context that we want to make sure is captured in here and then quantified. And Susan, I think you just hit on many of the ones that I also think about. So for example, we're thinking of landform. Our landform is unique. And I think we all know that. We have canyons, we have bluffs, we have sensitive geologic resources, we have erosion, we have watersheds. We have a very unique landform. And I think if we have the opportunity to characterize what that is, and then identify how we deal with it in our design guidelines when a property has that, has that uniqueness, has that Encinitas uniqueness on its property. I think that would be helpful. Like, what is a bluff? What is a canyon? What is erosive soils? What are our things? And identify what those are, and then wrap design guidelines around quantifying. Well, you need to maybe one objective then would be to preserve a specific amount of vegetation in place. So that comes to mind as an approach. So I think sometimes it's hard to get our heads around how do we do this, because it's not easy. There's so many great things in our community that we could capture here and help to communicate how objectively the developer can design so that it's measurable, and we can use those measurements to let them know whether it's aligned with our guidelines or not. So I just wanted to point to those examples and say, I think that's in the right direction, but we need to modify them associated with what's unique about us. And I'm happy to talk more about that, but it's like a conversation much longer than I'm gonna have here, and I don't want to take up that much time here. I do have two other points, and one of them is when it comes to the landscape, I would suggest we go in the direction of the multiple benefits of the plant materials. And I think Joe mentioned this and maybe others, but one of the things we try to achieve with our urban forest is carbon sequestration and shade. And so we want to think about those things. What are our other objectives that we're trying to achieve with our landscape? And if we say something like simply, we need we're going to require 2 trees in a courtyard that's 200 square feet. Well, that's one thing, but what if those trees are palms? Those aren't going to provide the other benefits that we're hoping to provide. And so maybe we need to be then more specific to say 2 trees in a courtyard that need to provide a certain square footage of shade within 5 years. And we can do that. We, as an industry, we can quantify those things. So we can be specific about the landscape elements. We could do plantable square footage of the landscape area too. And that ties into permeable surfaces and stormwater management. So we've got the multiple benefits of that, and it's a matter of square footage. It's objective and measurable. As far as the buffers, we can do a visual, we can say we'll screen at 10 feet or 12 feet high within 3 years. And that's common in other ordinances that I've worked with over the years. A third comment I'd like to make, and it's sometimes overlooked, but in my industry, it's not, and that is visual assessments. The federal government has used them a lot, and sometimes municipal and state and local governments use them. I know Caltrans does and SANDAG do. In my earlier career, I worked with ADOT, Arizona Department of Transportation. They would require that visual assessments be done of a setting. And so before you would go in with a roadway corridor, landscape architects would be hired to do visual assessments. I don't do that work anymore, but I know that it is work that's done. And the benefit to just this knowledge, and I'm not saying we do visual assessments, but the benefit to the knowledge is a visual assessment is a tool that takes something that most people think is subjective and makes it objective. So for instance, we say we are interested in maintaining the character and continuity, visual continuity of our community. Well, that sounds soft, that sounds subjective. So how can we make that objective? Well, a visual assessment actually goes through the process of identifying key view sheds. It's a public view shed of a property, or maybe it's a private view shed of a property, but it takes those view sheds and it says, and it evaluates what the contrast of that view shed is currently. And then with a new development, with something new in that location, is there more contrast with the new development? I'm just using the contrast as an example because I think it's one we can all kind of picture. But there are other examples of things that can be measured. Contrast would be form, shape, size, maybe even color. And so you look at some of these key measurable metrics having to do with what our eye perceives, and you can pull them into, kind of like, I know you were talking about things being in maybe table forms or benchmark forms. I'm talking to Jamie and Scott. You were talking about, there's certain kinds of forms you could put things in so you can quantify them over time. I can see the visual assessment coming together in that form so that you have a total number at the bottom. And Jamie and Scott, you may already know what I'm talking about. The BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, has some good resources online for visual resource assessment. I hope that's helpful. And that was it for me.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Lyons. Commissioner Doyle.
Thank you very much. I looked at this site planning, building form massing, and landscaping. I knew we had many experts here, so I took a deep dive into both the site planning aspect and the form and massing, because historically, any one of these projects, 60% of the concerns usually concern the mass of a project or the apparent mass of a project. And we'll say another 40% is site planning, and the rest is something else. Landscaping, I'm sorry, I gave landscaping a short shrift there, but looking at site planning, I'm taking this as an opportunity to maybe make some positive changes towards our code as we objectify this. So I'm looking at things from a very pedestrian level. So I look at the entryways to our projects and the frontages where the mixed use projects usually end up with retail. And I want to, I want gathering spaces, I want open spaces, but I don't want them inside a walled enclave. I want a certain portion of them to be allocated to be both public and private. So along the edges of projects, if there's a pop out for a bench, it should be kind of someplace where the neighborhood interacts with the project. Building on this one, I looked at, some projects are quite large and block access points that once existed. So if I look at projects that were to span, say, 2 horizontal streets, we have several of those along the 101 in Leucadia where the streets aren't very deep or the blocks aren't deep. So if we have a project that used to span that project, what happens now is people put up fences and that's it. Where kids used to cross or walk around a parking lot, now that's no longer possible. So one thing that would be very quantifiable would be to allow pedestrian access across such properties if they span greater than a distance of X. Could be, 100 feet, 300 feet. What I want to avoid is building walls. I don't want our projects to be walls. We put walls around all of our projects, and some of them it makes sense because they're up against neighbors. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. I've looked at so many of these where there's a little roundabout community with walls all the way around. The back wall butts up to a street where kids go to school with them, probably go there, but they can't get through, and it's silly. So I thought if anyone was in agreement, I would like to see us codify this somehow. This, in Swedish they call it allemansrätt. It's the ability to cross from one place to another without walls in the way. Looking at building form and massing, this is a really hard one because we have all the setbacks and we have to step out and we step back in. We end up with structures that still look like big rectangles with little notches cut out of them. So I came up with a thought. Perhaps we could say no more than 40% of a horizontal plane can be on the same plane. So 40% of the building might be here, the other 40% must be back, and 20% somewhere a third place. And they can mix it up a little bit, but we can end up with buildings that don't look like, New New York City blocks of just square glass fronts. We'll look at things that look a little funky, a little bit Leucadia. The cut-ins can allow the pedestrian access or the pedestrian amenities on these mixed-use projects. Another one which I'd love to figure out, I don't have a great solution, but in our code, one thing we've got is we ask that people make large structures appear as a collection of smaller structures. And I've been racking my brains thinking about how to codify that. I want it. I feel it's a good thing. We've seen a lot of projects, the piece behind Seaside Market. We've had a couple of our elder care facilities transformed this way, and they look nice. They don't look as impactful as a big square building. And I could go on with other things, but I'm going to pass the speaker's role to someone else.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Doyle. Chair Ehlers.
Yeah, I'm going to try and follow the questions from staff. So I think the first question was about major areas of concern. And so in the case of SB 35, it exempts CEQA. And I think one of the things we have to be doing here, and we haven't talked about it yet tonight, is figuring out how to include objective CEQA-like standards that will protect the environment in lieu of having an EIR or the standard CEQA process. And examples could be limitations on import, export, cut, fill per acre, so that we can minimize truck driving and just the deformation of the property. But so, and I would go through CEQA at a very high level. Tonight's kind of a high level discussion. Grading, fire safety. I think Susan, I heard you say that, I think, or maybe it was Joe. I think that we could codify evacuation times, things like that, and quantify and codify traffic access and limits on peak traffic generation. In other words, we have to take a lot of standard CEQA analyses and come up with some key objective standards that could be put in here. And I think I understand that correct, right, Jennifer? Is that one of the purposes of this?
The main objective is to create objective design standards based on our subjective standards. I mean, some of the things, and we can talk more about when we get into actual planning commission meeting, also is, we're going to take this whole list, but then also look at what we have, if they're more policy based, that we require a general plan amendment, or if these are more like zoning code standards, which are, the bigger chunks. So, our focus was more in this realm of, we've created the envelope. Now, what are we going to do in that envelope? And how do we reduce those concerns around the site planning and the design of the building? But we're still hearing you on these other aspects that I think some of you have brought up today, and I think I need to go back and look at them a little bit closer on where they lie.
Yeah, exactly. And what I'm looking for from the direction from this group tonight is, do you agree that we need to open the envelope up and get some of these bigger picture items? I think it's mentioned directly in the HCD Objective Design Standard guidance, and they talk about the CEQA and trying to replace the CEQA coverage. So that's kind of my big picture. And we get down to question number 2 was about specific recommendations. And I would, FAR was one of the first ones I thought of. Olievenheim, I don't have a FAR limit on my lot. I'd like to see one added to, a reasonable one, and we should review the others. One of the things we did on R30 properties that I think should be moved to the others is the maximum average unit size. And I think we could do something else, something similar with maximum volumetric ratio. And I think there may even be something that may be a maximum and minimum amenity square footage based on floor area ratio. The first 2 are especially important to me because they are not subject to waivers, because they have nothing to do with achieving density. So no waiver will stop them. So Tony, to your point, we need to craft some of these things that will enhance and maintain our community character that are immune to the waiver attack. Now, they could still be subject to the incentives, right? The 1 to 2 incentives that can be granted. But certainly if we can craft something in here that'll help keep community character in spite of waivers. I think going beyond that, again, specific recommendations, and I won't go into all the detail. I think that's the future work, but upper floor step back, very similar to the R30, where we put limits on anything above the second floor. And you say, well, why? We don't allow second floors. Well, these are all density bonus, and we should be able to put a step back on that second floor on any property that's, let's say, neighboring a residential, so that, why? They could just ask for a waiver. Well, they can only ask for a waiver if they can't fit their density within that restricted envelope. And by having that step back between neighboring residential, you reduce the bulk of mass apparent from that side. So there are things like that I'd like to see. The articulation, I think the standard did a real good job, or the technical guideline did a good job of quantifying articulation. I know it's going to be difficult, Kevin. I totally agree with you, but we'll get into that. And then point system for plants. So one of the things that the Planning Commission has been doing over the last 2-3 years is we've been adding to the definition for the condition for native plants. And I think Brett Farrell probably started it saying 50% native plants. I, of course, then asked the devil's advocate question, is that 50% of the 1 gallon buckets, or is that 50% of the area covered? And so the idea in this technical guideline of a point system and stating that 50% of the points for the landscaping shall be native, Southern California native. And, I'd go a step further and say Southern California native, endemic to 100 miles, within 100 miles of the coast. We could be very, very specific and provide a plant list that is considered acceptable. It's very objective. It's very doable. And so those are the general ones. And then the third question, my last point, it would be examples that we like and don't like. And rather than driving around, I hopped on Google Maps and I did Street View, and I went down Vulcan. I advise everybody to go down Vulcan virtually. And I'll tell you the first one that I like, and that would be Iris at 643 North Vulcan. They've done a great job with two-tone, with little hip roof features that really keep the scale down. So if we could apply standards that look like that. Some of the good and bad would be like 1915 Vulcan. It's a very modern looking one. They've broken up the upper roof line. I think there's other objective standards we could have applied. I'll go to the bad. I like to always do good, bad, and ugly. The bad, if it's the 4-story apartment that was at Garden View, and I didn't write down the address. It's the one that was built as part of Encinitas Ranch, and it's basically a big monolith, but it's got different colors, and I think the colors failed to mitigate the planarity, the monolithic nature. So that's a bad. And the ugly, it's an old one. There are a couple old ones, both on Vulcan. 1549 Vulcan. The side that's presented to the public on Vulcan, and this is presented to 101, to Vulcan, to all the train traffic, looks very industrialized with a very industrialized fence around it. It's got just little metal smokestacks going up. I kind of expect to see raw materials go on one side and cars come out the other side. It's that industrialized. So I'd like to come up with a way to define it. And then another one that is an example, and I hate to pick on people, but you were looking for examples. 1726 Vulcan. It's an older development, and if the look I looked at, you can kind of see an isometric of it, and I can see the side and I can see the front. The front's, it's basically a flat roof with a little hat along the front edge, and the back side has none of the design elements that the front has. The front has minimal. So I'll go back to what Les Bagg, who one of our original planning commissioners, always asked, and almost every one of our projects has this requirement, is that 4-sided design. You don't design it as though you're only putting the front of the project gets all the treatment. It should be all four sides. And I think that is it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair Ehlers. Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. So this was a really fun exercise, and I got to survey a lot of community members and ask them what they really liked and how to define terms we use all the time to describe Encinitas, like funky and vibrant and eclectic. And I got some really great answers, which I hope to share with you all today. So I think to start off, it was a really important point that the speaker brought up, that we need to get comparable numbers of bedrooms and also square footage for our affordable units as compared to the market rate units. I think we haven't thoroughly defined that well enough, and we need to do that. So some examples of multifamily and apartment that I think have aspects that are really good. I'll just list them off. The Mission Ridge apartments that are between Encinitas Boulevard and Calle Cantabria. Beautiful Torrey Pines trees, sycamore trees that can really grow into these mature trees that Commissioner Sherrod speaks about a lot. The Moonlight Lofts have beautiful stone elements, so you can see these fossilized plants in some of those, and I think that brings a lot of intrigue to an otherwise let's say it was a building that was hard for a lot of us to swallow, but now I find myself enjoying elements of it. At 1200 North Coast Highway 101, which is where French Corner is located, I love how it's a modern building, but that it's pulled in this nod to our historic architecture. And so you have the shape of a ship hull that I think is a nod to our boathouses, our Encinitas boathouses. I love how French Corner is there on the corner with outdoor dining. And like Commissioner Doyle said, there's a place where the community gathers really naturally right there. The sidewalks are a little wider. There's bike parking, and then there's outdoor seating right there on the corner. So I think in all the projects that we're discussing, we should really maximize corners. If it's residential, there should be a wraparound balcony so that we have, a balcony on both sides of that building. And if it's commercial, it should be dining, or it should be something really welcoming so that folks from the public feel comfortable walking up there, and there's not the assumption of consumption just to hang out there. You don't have to be buying something. You don't have to be eating a meal if you want to hang out there. I love the idea of points for community benefits and coming up with a way that we can have nature play. So instead of having this big, ugly playground, there would be rocks for kids to climb on and boulders, and maybe a tree that has come from our community somewhere else that's laid down and kids can climb around on the stumps. A lot of people said to me what they think is special about Encinitas and Leucadia is our rock gardens, and particularly Dave's Rock Garden right now near Cottonwood Creek, but also these other places where rock gardens pop up. And that's something that I love about visiting the Scripps campus down there at UCSD, is that they've got this beautiful rock garden with really low water use plants, and it's meant to mimic like a tide pool or underwater. And I think we should be encouraging our designers and architects to get points for doing fun, intriguing things like that. Folks were really interested in seeing hand-painted signage. And so places that were brought up was Kino's beautiful hand-painted signage that's recently been redone. The Sea Air Mobile Park, where you can tell somebody went out there and hand-lettered that gorgeous sign. Even our local parks and beaches have these beautiful hand-carved signs. Some of them are still hand-carved. And I think we should, require developments to do that. I think Kino's is people are probably thinking I'm joking, but I'm not joking, that Kino's is a really great example of mixed use architecture. It's really historic. There's wood shingles out in front, a lot of natural elements. There's stained glass that have depictions of our local landscapes. It's earth toned. Let's see. I said I appreciate when buildings, especially in the main stretch along Highway 101, avoid grays and use more greens and blues and natural colors, and that we do whatever we can to sort of extend that beach feeling more landward. And so we're using, shells as part of the things that make up our wall elements, or we're using the color of our gorgeous sandstone bluffs to have some colors in these buildings. And that a way for us to be able to preserve some of our historic character, as Commissioner Doyle mentioned, is to bring those smaller buildings to the front. So it appears that there's a cottage up front, or, a little horseshoe gathering of smaller cottages. Even if there is a bigger building in back, I think it brings it down to that pedestrian scale that we love about our old Encinitas and Leucadia communities. Some other design elements that folks said were important was board and battened exterior. It looks really beachy, really ship-like. Using shingles, using shiplap, all natural elements that I think we've discussed a lot here. And also points for local art. And so I think this is something we need to continually remind ourselves of, is that we have an amazing arts commission, and how can we channel some of our developers to this arts commission and present ideas to them that they think are consistent with our local art that we have, and even showcase more of that. And that gets people excited about things they might not otherwise be excited about. And then the last two things I'll mention is that I think we should also include points for living roofs. And so if somebody is behind and they have to look down on somebody else's roof, they're especially important along the El Camino Real corridor with what we develop, that it's green and that it's not, blacktop and hot and creating more heat than we need to, but that we found a way to bring nature even to these high buildings. And then, rooftop gardens, I think would be really well suited along El Camino Real corridor. And then the last thing is just, I think it's called beneficial reuse. So finding ways to reuse materials that might otherwise end up in the landfill to build our new generation of buildings. And then I love the idea that I think Councilmember Mosca brought it up, and also Commissioner Sherrod, that when you're reading the survey, it's very technical. And so I hope if we do another iteration of that survey, we can have people select images from around the town or elsewhere that say, do you prefer this or that? And then they can choose the image that they like, and maybe also even upload their own image. So what in our own communities inspire us, the way that we as decision makers have been able to go around and collect inspiration from our own city. So that's all I got.
Okay, thank you, Council Member. Deputy Mayor Prince.
Yes, thank you. Hearing some great thoughts. Wondering though, in terms of our objective standards for projects that are mixed use with 2/3 or multifamily, it sounds from the conversation like we're proposing ideas that would apply to a much greater range of projects that we see in Encinitas. So it's my hope that we can address the appropriate documents sooner rather than later. We heard some objections to having flock freight in downtown, and I've also heard some concerns about retail brick and mortar in our downtown being converted into restaurants. And so I think that the downtown Encinitas specific plan, as well as the North 101 specific plan, could use some conversation around those particular issues to determine whether we should be revising those documents. I heard somebody earlier talk about the general plan. Maybe the general plan needs to be amended. Yeah, I think all of our critical documents in the city that specifically address land use, we need to get those in front of the Planning Commission and the council to address a lot of these issues. Back in August of 2015, there was an agenda item that was brought forward to talk about perhaps adopting a mansionization ordinance similar to the one that's in Solana Beach. And it was panned. It was very unpopular with the public, and all my colleagues had no interest in pursuing it. And it was looking at, floor area ratio and some consideration of the existing structure on a lot, so that we weren't seeing cottages demolished for the production of huge houses that look down on neighbors on both sides. And so it went nowhere. And this is the first time these sort of subjects have been brought up again. So I think that the questions are important, and my colleagues have all raised a whole bunch of very important issues. I would say that from where I sit, probably a project that I enjoy is the Moonlight Lofts for some of the reasons that Councilmember Hinsey mentioned, although mass of that project is a bit much. And so, these are some of the challenges that we have. I like Rhino Art. That's a mixed use project. It's a pretty cool building. And, I'm not sure that was designed in such a way that it was intended to maximize the the potential profits. It was not developer driven because the owner occupant is was the developer. So I think that's our biggest challenge at this point, is that what we're seeing are developers coming along that get into contract on a property that is then going to require that they max everything out. We drive people to invoke density bonus and to request waivers to reduce setbacks, et cetera, et cetera. So we have some challenges as it relates to all of these items, and it's my hope that we can get to some objective standards so that it's pretty clear to any potential developer what is expected of them going into the project, so that we don't end up with an abundance of appeals that have to address these issues. So that's it today.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Dalton.
Thank you. I'm always very nervous when people start talking about trying to codify what good design is, and one person's idea about the types of roofs that are appropriate versus someone else's. I think that's a very difficult thing. I think it's going to be a real challenge to create a document that you follow this ABC outline and suddenly you end up with good architecture. I just don't think it happens that way. So not to be a naysayer, I think it's a very difficult task ahead of us. I think there needs to be flexibility in that document. There are going to be good examples of architecture or high quality design that will fall outside of the norm of what I consider kind of a cottage bias in Encinitas. Everybody likes the idea of a single family, single story cottage in their community. But we're talking about multifamily housing. And if we're being sincere about trying to increase the number of affordable units and density, and I'm talking about along transportation corridors, I think we've got to think outside of just the cottage mindset. So I think, and for that purpose, these rules need to apply to specific areas. What's appropriate in downtown Encinitas is vastly different than what would be appropriate in Olivenheim. And, the 101 corridor through Leucadia or the village of Cardiff, those areas need different standards than a predominantly single family neighborhood that's, I'll say Olivenheim again, or old New Encinitas, something like that. So I would hope that there'd be some flexibility built into this document. One of the examples given was about specifying the wall between two properties, and it's something as simple as that. But if a developer wanted to provide an earth berm instead, would they be excluded or precluded from doing that? Some others have mentioned point systems, and I think that might be a good route to that would allow some flexibility for developers and designers. Maybe you incentivize good quality elements. You want pedestrian pedestrian links. You want bike parking. You want green roofs. You want environmental. Let them say a project needs to accumulate a certain number of points, and let them establish those points in any number of ways, and so that you're not cookie cutter creating a formula for every building in the city, but that there's some flexibility for what they pick and choose that they can achieve. So with that, I'll leave my comments there, just to think that we have a very difficult task, and I'm about building in as much flexibility and specificity to different areas of the city. Thank you.
I was waiting for you to suggest that a nice designed building was the lifeguard tower.
Well, I happen to agree with you there, but maybe not everyone is. I don't know.
Oh yeah, that was because you designed it, right? I understand.
All right. Well, thank you, Commissioner Dalton. Before we go on to round two here, I'm going to jump in and just say a few things, and also just point everybody toward the fact that it's 5:27 and this meeting's supposed to go till 5:30. So if we could wrap it up shortly, I think that would be great for everybody. So we do have our city council meeting starting at 6. So I want to echo what Commissioner Dalton said about the need for flexibility, because I think that that is a really important point. So in some ways, I think the point of objective standards, this was laid out in one of the original slides, but I don't think it fully captured everything, because one of the points is to say that projects can't be rejected for reasons that aren't written down. So like there are reasons that you could say this project doesn't meet these standards, you need to go back and meet them. But in many ways, we don't have to prescribe everything. So having a system like a point system to me seems like a really good idea if there's a way to give people the flexibility within the code that we need, while not introducing a subjective element that allows for rejection of projects just based on personal opinion or feeling. So a couple of points I want to make. My colleagues made a lot of great points, and I'm not going to repeat them all, the things I supported or found to be in conflict with other points people said, but I'm just going to highlight a few of the things that I think were most important to me. One of them is that the previous commissioner from Cardiff, he brought up that if you require step backs for each story as it gets like second story, third story, you're going to have everything look like a wedding cake. And you don't want every development that is more than one story to be looking exactly the same. So I think that setbacks are really important for things like air and light and creating more, less of a visual monolith. But I don't think we want to prescribe that everything has to be set back in a certain way, because you will potentially, I think, end up with that wedding cake effect. I completely agree with the fact that our public spaces and the aesthetic of them need to be protected. So to the extent we can have all of the utilities screened or otherwise put in a different area or integrated in, so that we don't have big SDG&E boxes in the middle of the sidewalk. Like we do have that on Highway 101 with a relatively new project where it just juts out and then the sidewalk kind of has to go around it. And it looks truthfully looks terrible. And then some of these other air conditioning and other just very industrial utility uses that are in the public space. I think the protection of the public space and its aesthetics is really important. So to the degree we're able to make that part of our objective standards, I think that's very valuable. I really like the idea of shade from trees, but I also want to leave the flexibility, for example, for like edibles. I think if there's somebody who wants to be planting all fruit trees, that they should be able to do that. And I also think if somebody wants to have a theme that's desert, that they would be able to have cactuses that are tall. And, there have to be other ways to meet those standards. But, moving toward the idea of providing more shade and carbon sequestration, certainly that's a value. And to the extent we can have flexibility, but promote that, I think that's a really good idea. I'll bring up the issue of connectivity to public spaces and to other properties. And this comes from what Commissioner Doyle said about, kids who used to walk across something or there's a road in the back and there's a big wall. I absolutely agree that that's a problem. And one of the things that the council did was to adopt a connection. Basically, any of the housing element sites and all properties in the city have to promote biking and walking, and the biking and walking paths and routes that already exist in the city. So, and this actually was even an issue with the Fox Point Farm development. I honestly feel this is an issue with almost every development, where the neighbors want the new development walled off. They don't want new people parking in their neighborhood. They don't want people walking across their neighborhood. They perceive their neighborhood as being fine exactly as it is, and they do not want any of these new neighbors to be using their space. And it's very difficult, I think, to push against that. In a discretionary way. So when it's a requirement that there be a connection between the public spaces in the new development and the existing development, I think those are ways that we can create more connectivity. I think the value of connectivity is strong, and it does, when you think about the things that you love as a kid or that you love now, those little paths that connect things that are almost a little bit secret, like there's something about that is just really creates that sense of community character that we really cherish. And there are developments that do it consciously, and it's so great to see that. And I don't know, we've already changed our code. It went through the Coastal Commission, but we still did end up with like Fox Point Farms is a fantastic development, but it really didn't make that connection as much as it could have because of the very strong feeling from the people who live nearby who said, we can't have parking in our neighborhood. And so anyway, the developer followed that and didn't provide that connectivity. So that's something that I think we really have to think about, how to create that consciously and have objective standards that do connect. Because I think that's a societal value that we have as a city. And I think when we're looking out for the public good, this is also why the city council in recent years stopped giving away the public right of way for private use. Because that was happening routinely when I was first elected on our consent calendar. And it was like, we were creating roadblocks that we didn't need to. And you see in the city a lot of places where roads, they go right into a private property and then they pick up on the other side of that private property. And so all of our code improvements need to be headed toward that creation of that public connectivity and public space, because that is a public good. And then the last thing I'll say is, let's see. Well, I think that's it. So I like the idea of living roofs as well. So to the extent we can have a point system, I support it. And I really appreciate the staff coming to us jointly. It's really nice to hear from our planning commissioners and talk all together as a group. We do this periodically, and I'm really thrilled that we were able to do it on this topic. And I am hopeful that this will lead to less conflict and also to really good design in our city. So thank you for the high engagement from everybody here. So I think we have one more comment from Councilmember Lyons, if you would like to go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to emphasize that every parcel has its unique opportunities and constraints. And I think we've gotten at that a little bit by acknowledging the uniqueness of our villages, the uniqueness of our specific plan areas, and the uniqueness of our topography and landform and vegetation. So when we talk about conserving and blending with our context, where we have the opportunity to preserve existing vegetation and preserve existing historic features, I think we should wrap that into a point system. Not every property has that opportunity, but we do have a lot of prior nursery properties that have amazing mature vegetation on them. And this is unique to us, and they can be right in the middle of other homes, and sometimes they're not that large. So I think they represent a unique opportunity where if we can look at preservation of plant materials and historic properties, that's just one example of where we can really provide an opportunity for a developer to use a point system to get towards their objectives in a way that works for them and also works for the surrounding community and helps that development blend with the context. I also like the idea of adaptive reuse of properties, where we have existing properties that can just be adaptively reused for a new purpose. It ties into the recycling that Kelly brought up, and it ties into the visual context and blending with the setting. I just wanted to kind of put a fine point on that. The other, I just wanted to bring up the native plant policy, which has been discussed, just brought up by a few folks, in that we did approve as a city council to go forward with developing a native plant policy. So that is something that the Planning Commission and the Environmental Commission will do together. And Jennifer, I'm not sure how that might fit in with your schedule. We don't need to respond to that right now. But I've noted that it was brought up as something that could be quantified along with what's happening here with our objective design standards. And if you want some more contact from architects and design professionals in the community, there are a lot of architects, planners, and design professionals in the community that can be reached through AIA, ASLA, and APA that really do care about the development in our community. They're used to hands-on how to use these guidelines and standards. So you may look to reach out to that group through some of us who are in the profession. to get additional feedback. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Lyons. Chair Ehlers.
Yeah, just quick, I just want to make sure staff had a chance to ask any questions. So make sure we see Jennifer or RRM. That's it.
Yeah, Jennifer, do you want to ask any questions or anybody?
I don't have any questions per se, but I would, like always, if you have any additional comments, or always feel free to share the survey with your constituents, as well as your, as Councilmember Lyons said, share with other professionals here that you guys are, that personally. So share. The more input we get now, it makes it easier to develop and get everybody's comments versus when we get to Planning Commission and then everybody comes out of the woodwork.
Okay, thank you. And now last two comments, and then we're going to close this meeting. So Commissioner Doyle and then Commissioner Sherratt.
I'm real quick. I dove into the survey and I made it about 5 minutes in, and I realized I didn't have enough time to continue and I had to back out. I didn't have my source. I didn't have my examples handy. Now, Kelly mentioned something more like a multiple choice test where you say, I like this, like that, don't like this, don't like that. There are the same, I think there's the same big projects that most people are going to be talking about, and it'd be great if we could update the survey now, because honestly, it's getting low engagement because I think a lot of people enter it and get about 4 or 5 steps in and go, whoa, I better come back later. So that was my feedback there, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff. It's a lot of work, but it's not everyone's as deep into it as we are.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Sherratt, and then we'll go to you, Roy.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that with respect to the site, I didn't specifically say about massing and so forth, but that really is covered in our zoning already, pretty much. The only thing that isn't is protection of sunlight for solar collectors. And I noticed in Berkeley, they do have a policy where they can deny a permit for major residential project if it unreasonably obstructs sunlight, air, or views. And so they have a little statement that they say, in order to approve anything that they're doing for permits, that they make a finding. And if this finding includes that obstruction of sunlight, it's automatically a finding that the permit would be denied. And so it's sort of interesting how different cities word these things, and probably we need to look at how other cities are doing it.
Okay, thank you. Roy.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members, and the commission. Great feedback, great conversation. We appreciate the feedback received. I just wanted to manage expectations of what we're going to come back with. There is a strict timeline that we have with the grant. So we do have this effort is under the SB2 grant, and we had to complete everything by February of 2022. As some of you mentioned, some of the feedback received tonight or made tonight is borderline looking at now changing codes where it could require some additional analysis beyond the scope of work that we embarked upon or we initiated. So what we'll do is we'll go back with a consultant, we'll listen and gather all the feedback received here today, and then we'll organize them based on what can be done in a timely manner for us to meet our deadline by February 22. And then we'll identify others that would trigger a substantial process, whether it's a zoning code amendment or a specific plan amendment and other amendments to our codes and guidelines. And then we'll present that to both the Planning Commission and City Council, particularly to get direction on how to proceed with those. So again, thank you all for the feedback tonight. We appreciate it, and we'll see you at the next first Planning Commission.
Okay, well, thank you for managing expectations. And thank you everybody for participating. And we'll see the council members at 6. Thank you, Planning Commissioners. Thank you, staff. Bye-bye.
Thank you.